The night my brother called to tell me our father had been rushed to the emergency room, I was standing in my kitchen making dinner. I remember the exact moment. The smell of garlic in the pan, the low hum of the TV in the background, my phone lighting up on the counter. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not since the argument about the property. But something made me pick up. Dad collapsed, my brother said. No hello, no lead-in. Just those 2 words, flat and fast, like he was reading off a grocery list. I turned off the stove and grabbed my keys before he finished the sentence. My father is 67 years old. He spent 40 years working construction, got up before sunrise every single day of his life, never complained once. He is the kind of man who fixes things with his hands and doesn't talk much about feelings. But when you're sick, when you're hurting, he shows up. He always showed up. When I was 9 and broke my arm falling out of a tree, he sat in the hospital waiting room for 6 hours without eating anything because he didn't want to leave the building. That's who my father is. That's who he has always been. When I got to the hospital, my brother was already there. So was his wife. So was my sister-in-law's mother, for reasons I still don't fully understand. They were sitting in the family waiting area near the front entrance, and the first thing I noticed was that my brother had a cup of coffee. He looked calm. He looked the way you look when you're waiting for a delayed flight, not when your father is somewhere behind those double doors with doctors around him. I didn't sit down. I went straight to the nurse's station and asked what was happening. The woman at the desk looked at me carefully and said she could only share information with immediate family. I told her I was his son. She asked for my name, checked something on her screen, and told me the doctor would be out to speak with us shortly. I went back and stood near my brother. What happened? I asked. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. He was at home. The neighbor found him on the porch. Which neighbor? Mrs. Calloway, I think. She called 911. I sat down then, not because I was calm, but because my legs felt suddenly uncertain. Mrs. Calloway was in her 80s. She had known my father for over 20 years. She must have seen him through her window, gone outside and found him alone on his own porch. Why was he alone? I asked. My brother looked at his phone. I was at work. You live 10 minutes from him. He didn't answer. The doctor came out about 40 minutes later. A woman in her 50s, dark hair pulled back. The kind of steady eyes that tell you she has delivered hard news before and learned how to carry it carefully. She told us our father had suffered a mild cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but serious enough. They were running more tests. He was conscious and stable, but they wanted to keep him for at least 48 hours for monitoring. Can I see him? I asked. One at a time, she said, and only briefly right now. I looked at my brother. He made a small gesture with his hand, like go ahead, which I found strange. If that were my father in there, if that were the man who raised me lying in a hospital bed, I would not be making small hand gestures about who goes in first. I would be already moving through that door. I found him in a room near the end of a wide, quiet hallway. He was propped up slightly on the pillow, a monitor beside him, an IV in his left arm. He looked smaller than I remembered, which happens sometimes when you see someone you love in a hospital bed, but the room is too big for them suddenly. He opened his eyes when I came in. Hey, Pop, I said. Don't make a fuss, he said immediately. I pulled the chair close and sat down. I'm not making a fuss. Your face is making a fuss. I almost laughed. Almost. We talked for a few minutes, not about anything serious. He asked about my job. I asked if he had eaten. He said the nurse had brought him something earlier and it tasted like cardboard. I told him I would bring him real food tomorrow. He told me not to bother. But then, before I stood up to leave, he said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since. Your brother came by last Thursday, he said. Okay, I said. He brought some papers. I went still. What kind of papers? My father looked at the ceiling. Said I should sign them. Something about the house. Said it was just a formality. For taxes. I kept my voice very even. Did you sign them, Pop? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was tired. He said it would help. I nodded slowly, the way you nod when your brain is moving faster than your face. We'll figure it out, I told him. Don't worry about it right now. I walked back down that hallway and I did not look at my brother when I came back into the waiting room. I picked up my jacket from the chair and I said I was going to get some air. His wife said something like, it's cold out. And I said I know, and I left. In the parking lot, I stood between two cars and I called my father's attorney, a man named Gerald who had handled my father's estate planning for the last decade. I got his voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me first thing in the morning. Then I sat in my car for a long time in the dark and I thought about the papers. My father owns a house in Dayton, Ohio. It's not a mansion. It's a 3-bedroom house on a corner lot that he bought in 1989 and paid off in 2011. It is, by any measure, the most significant thing he has ever owned. He grew up with nothing. That house represents everything he built. And it had been in his name, solely his name, for as long as I could remember. My brother is 4 years older than me. He works in insurance. He has a nice house in a suburb 30 minutes away, drives a good car, takes vacations. He has never been struggling, not that I have ever seen, and yet for the past 2 years he has been making comments, small ones, subtle ones, about how dad is getting older, about how it might make sense to think about the future, about how someone should probably be managing things more actively. I had not thought too hard about those comments until that moment in the parking lot. Gerald called me back at 7:45 the next morning. I was already up. I had barely slept. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Has my father's property situation changed at all recently? Any changes to the deed?" Gerald was quiet for one beat too long. "I need to pull the file," he said carefully. "Gerald, please." Another pause. "There was an inquiry a few months ago. Your brother contacted me asking about the process for adding a co-owner to a property deed. I told him any such change would require your father's direct consent, and ideally should go through proper legal review. I assumed that was the end of it." "It wasn't," I said. I drove straight to the county recorder's office when it opened. I waited 22 minutes in a plastic chair. A woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain helped me look up the property record. The deed had been amended 11 days ago. My brother's name had been added as co-owner. I stood at that counter and read the document twice. My father's signature was at the bottom, shaky and slightly uneven in a way that did not look like his normal handwriting. My father's handwriting is precise. He used to work with blueprints. I took photos of every page. When I got to the hospital that morning, my brother was already there. He was sitting in the chair I had been sitting in the night before, close to my father's bed, talking in the easy, casual way of someone who has nothing to hide. His wife had brought flowers. They were in a plastic vase on the windowsill. I waited. I did not say anything in front of my father. My father did not need that, not there, not with monitors on his chest. When my brother stepped out to get coffee, I followed him. In the hallway, under the flat fluorescent light, I asked him to explain the deed. He didn't flinch. He said it was a practical decision. He said he had talked to Dad about it and Dad had agreed. He said it protected the asset. He said, and I remember this exactly, "You weren't around for these conversations." I told him I had talked to Gerald. Something shifted behind his eyes, just briefly. Then the easy expression came back. "Gerald doesn't have the full picture," he said. "What's the full picture?" I asked. "Dad wanted this," he said. "Ask him." I looked at my brother for a long moment. I have known him my entire life. I used to follow him around the neighborhood when I was 6, trying to keep up with his bike. He used to let me sit with him and his friends sometimes, which felt like an honor when I was small. We are not close now, not the way we once were, but he is still my brother. He is still the person who called me last night to tell me our father had collapsed, and he had gone to our father, an aging man living alone, a man who gets tired easily now, a man who trusts his son with papers, and he had watched him sign. I went back to Gerald that afternoon. I explained what I knew. Gerald was quiet and professional, but I could hear the weight of it in his voice. He said that if the signature had been obtained under conditions that compromised our father's full understanding of what he was signing, there were legal avenues to explore. He used phrases like undue influence and capacity assessment. He said I should document everything. I called my father's primary care doctor. I asked whether my father had any documented cognitive concerns. She said his last assessment, 6 months ago, had shown some mild memory issues consistent with normal aging. Nothing clinical, but enough that any major legal decision should ideally have been made with support. Mild memory issues, not clinical, but enough. I went back to the hospital that evening. My brother was gone. My father was watching the news with the volume low. I sat down next to him. "Pop," I said. I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer." He muted the television. He looked at me with the steady eyes he has always had. "When you signed those papers last week," I said, "what did your brother tell you they were for?" My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was to make sure the house stayed in the family, in case something happened to me. Did he explain that he would own half of it? My father looked at me. Really looked at me. "Half?" he said. The word sat between us in the quiet room. "He said it was a formality," my father said slowly. "For taxes," slowly. "For taxes." He said my name would still be on it. "Your name is still on it," I said carefully, "but so is his." My father turned and looked at the wall. The monitor beside him made its small, steady sound. Outside the window, the parking lot lights were coming on in the early dark. "He said it was to protect me," my father said. "I know," I said. "That's what he said." We sat there for a while without talking. I didn't push him further. He was in a hospital bed and he had just had a cardiac event and he was 67 years old and he had trusted his son. That was enough for one night. I spent the next 2 weeks building a case. I know that sounds like something from a legal drama, but that is honestly what it felt like. Gerald helped me understand what was needed. I gathered the hospital records showing my father's condition at the time of signing. I got a written statement from Mrs. Calloway about my father's state in the weeks prior. She had noticed he seemed confused sometimes, had asked her once what day it was. I requested my father undergo a formal cognitive assessment, which his doctor facilitated. The results showed that while he was not clinically impaired, his ability to process complex legal language was significantly below what you'd expect for a decision of that magnitude. I also found out something else. My brother had a lien on his own property, a significant one. He had taken out a second mortgage 2 years ago and was behind on payments. The suburb house, the good car, the vacations, some of it was held together with debt I hadn't known about. The house in Dayton, split between 2 owners, could be sold without full agreement if one owner petitioned properly under certain Ohio statutes. He wasn't protecting my father. He was protecting himself. When I brought all of this to Gerald, he laid out the options methodically. We could pursue a legal challenge to the deed amendment on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity at the time of signing. It would not be fast. It would not be simple. My father would need to be involved, and that meant he would have to understand what his older son had done. That was the part that made me feel sick. I didn't want to be the person who sat across from my father and told him his oldest child had manipulated him. But I also could not let it stand. I told my father on a Sunday afternoon. He was home by then, sitting in his usual chair by the window with a cup of tea. I sat across from him and I laid it out as gently and as clearly as I could. I told him about the lien on my brother's house. I told him what Gerald had said about undue influence. I told him that what my brother had done, whether he called it protecting the family or a tax formality or anything else, was not legal and was not right. My father listened without interrupting. He held his tea but didn't drink from it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want to fix it." "We can," I said. "Gerald says we have a real case." "I don't mean the papers," my father said. I waited. "I mean all of it," he said. "I raised 2 boys in this house. I don't know where I went wrong with one of them. That is the sentence I carry with me, not the legal documents, not the deed." That sentence from a man who has never once in his life asked for sympathy, sitting in his chair with cold tea and the weight of something he had not chosen. The legal process took 4 months. My brother did not make it easy. He hired an attorney who sent letters with formal language about our father's freely given consent. There were tense phone calls and one meeting in Gerald's office that I would rather not relive. My brother did not look at me across that conference table. He looked at his attorney, but the records were clear. The cognitive assessment was clear. The timeline, the lien, the papers, the collapse told its own story. In the end, the deed amendment was reversed. My father's house went back to his name alone. My brother's attorney quietly stopped responding to Gerald's correspondence after the reversal was finalized. My brother and I have not spoken since. I do not know if we will. I have thought about it. I have thought about the 6-year-old who followed him on a bike, the teenager who sat with his friends, the adult who picked up the phone when he called about our father. I have thought about what it means to share blood with someone and still not know them. But here is what I do know. My father called me last week to tell me the neighbor's dog had gotten into his garden again and he wasn't even really mad about it. He called because he wanted to tell someone and I was the person he called. We talked for 30 minutes about nothing important. He laughed twice. Real laughs, the ones that start in his chest. That call is worth more than anything else I can think of. Last Sunday, I drove out to Dayton. I brought groceries. Things I know he actually likes. Not flowers, not a card, just food. I made dinner while he sat at the kitchen table and talked at me the way he does, commenting on how I chop onions wrong, how I use too much oil, how his mother used to make it completely differently and it was better. I let him talk. After dinner, we sat on the porch, the same porch where Mrs. People, Calloway, had found him that afternoon. It was cold but not unbearable. He had a blanket across his knees. The neighborhood was quiet, the way neighborhoods get on Sunday evenings. That specific stillness. You didn't have to do all that, he said, meaning the legal process, the months of work. Yeah, I did, I said. He nodded slowly. Your grandfather used to say, he started, and then he paused the way he does when he's choosing words carefully. He used to say that a man's house is the only honest thing he'll ever own, because it doesn't lie about what he built. We sat with that for a while. The porch light came on automatically as it got darker. The street was empty. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then went quiet. I thought about the papers, the lien, the conference room, the 4 months. I thought about standing at the county recorder's counter reading a document that told me my brother had been planning this for longer than I wanted to know. I thought about my father's shaky signature at the bottom of a page he did not fully understand. And then I stopped thinking about all of it, because my father was still talking, something about the garden, about what he was going to plant in spring, about whether the corner bed got enough light or if he needed to trim the oak at the back. He had plans. For spring. For his house, his garden, his corner lot on a street in Dayton, Ohio. Nobody was taking that from him. Not while I was around. I have thought a lot about what makes a person do what my brother did. Not in an angry way, not anymore. But in the quiet, honest way you think about things late at night when the noise is gone and you're left with just the facts of what happened. He is not a monster. That would actually be easier. He is a man who got into financial trouble, looked around for a way out, and chose the path of least resistance, which happened to run directly through our father. That is the part that stays with me, not the deed, not the lien, not the 4 months of legal work or the conference room where he wouldn't meet my eyes. What stays with me is that he looked at a 67-year-old man who trusted him completely, and he made a calculation. He decided that his own comfort was worth more than his father's security, and then he dressed that calculation up in the language of care, protecting the asset, keeping it in the family, thinking about the future, and he handed it to a tired man on a Thursday afternoon and asked him to sign. I don't think my brother woke up one day and decided to be that person. I think it happened gradually, the way most slow failures do. One small compromise, then another, then a debt you don't tell anyone about, then a second mortgage, then a story you start telling yourself about how you deserve more than you have, how the family never really appreciated you, how this is actually fair when you think about it the right way. By the time he sat across from our father with those papers, I think he had convinced himself it was reasonable. That is what unchecked self-deception does to a person. It doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, one justified step at a time, until you are capable of something you never would have recognized in yourself 10 years earlier. And the thing about actions like that, the thing I have come to understand clearly, is that they carry their own consequences without anyone needing to enforce them. My brother didn't lose the house. He lost something harder to name and harder to recover. He lost the version of himself that our father believed in. He lost the phone calls on Sunday evenings, the dinners at the kitchen table, the porch in the cold with a blanket on your knees. He will not be there in the spring when my father plants the corner bed. He made a trade, and he got the worst end of it without realizing it yet. What I know now, more than anything else, is that intelligence without integrity is just a sharper tool for doing damage. My brother is not a stupid man. He knew exactly what he was doing and how to do it carefully. But knowing how to do something, and knowing whether you should, are completely different kinds of knowing, and the second one takes something that no amount of cleverness can replace. My father built that house with 40 years of work and kept his name on it for just as long. He deserved a son who would protect that, not exploit it. I am glad I was in a position to do something about it. I am glad Gerald answered the phone. I am glad Mrs. Calloway was looking out her window that afternoon. I am glad that a shaky signature on a county record can be challenged when the right conditions are met. But mostly I am glad for that Sunday on the porch. For 30 minutes of talking about nothing important. For a man with a blanket on his knees making plans for spring. In his house with his name on the deed. Exactly as it should be.